Reading with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so honored that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast. And please go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, and sign up for our free newsletter. We have a fantastic guest for you today. Her name is Dr. Marie Baimis George. She is the author of the Strength of Our Scars series. Hey, Dr. Maria, welcome to the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be talking with you today.
I'm excited to have you on, too. Pediatric surgery, just the thought, it terrifies me. And it also leaves me in awe to think that we've progressed as a species to the point where we're able to successfully operate on tiny beings. I just have to say that out there. And of course, being a dad, and now my kids are older, but being a dad, even the thought that one of my kids might need to have surgery is just the most terrifying thing in the world.
Well, it's absolutely terrifying. Yeah. Even if you're like a medical professional and you know exactly what your kid's going through in terms of anatomy or disease process, it's terrifying when it's your kid. Mm-hmm. And just to give you a quick correction, I'm actually a general surgery resident. And I developed these books when I was on my pediatric surgery rotation. But my goal is to become a transplant surgeon who also does pediatric and adult transplant.
Wow. An author, resident, you're going to be doing hearts. I think you should make better use of your time. You're just kind of sitting around all day.
Just chilling. Drawing, chilling, operating.
Yeah. So tell us about your series. Tell us about the Strength of Your Scars. There's 18 books in the series. Do they each address one type of surgery or injury? Or
Absolutely. So 18 and hopefully counting. I have a list of at least 50 that I want to make. But basically, when I was on my pediatric surgery rotation, I saw kids who just didn't understand what they were going through, no matter how well the doctors explained it. And parents who, like I said, even if you have medical background, it's terrifying when your kid's in the hospital. So I think, it's kind of this tenfold increase in trying to process and understand what's happening with this fear, apprehension, and anxiety that really does not help you understand at all. It ends up really impacting your level of comprehension because when you're scared, it's hard to take things in and really process them. Mm-hmm. So I looked around to see if there was any resources for kids and parents to kind of understand a little better beyond the kind of pamphlets we give out in the hospital, and there wasn't much. So I decided I wanted to create some children's books. I like to draw. I started drawing in medical school, and it helps with my, stress after work. And so I started I'm a very amateur artist, but I started doing these kind of silly sketches and created some books. And each book is designed for a different either medical or surgical condition. I started with the most common surgeries that we deal with in kids, which is kids with appendicitis, kids who have umbilical hernias, kids who have pyloric stenosis, or babies that have pyloric stenosis. And so I created those. I tested them out in the hospital. I did a research project to see if they helped parents with satisfaction, fear, and understanding. And they did. And so after seeing those results, it motivated me to keep making them. And now I'm on book 18. So, yeah.
Wow. I guess I'd love to crawl into your mind to be able to figure out. It's like you're already on this, and I heard that these residencies, you're working like 28 hours a day, and I don't know how that works because you're only 24. But you're just working, and the system is set up to be abusive, and this is what I'm hearing, and so you're experiencing that, and you're seeing that there's this problem and there's this need, and you decide, yeah, I got a little bit extra time. I can just write a children's book.
Yeah, people have asked me that a lot. They're like, when do you sleep? I do sleep. I get a lot of sleep. But it's hard. We work really long hours. We work most days and most weekends. But in my spare time, like, after work, some people will watch TV or exercise. I do exercise every now and again. But I enjoy drawing, and I enjoy creating these books. So it doesn't seem like, it's not like I go home and then do more work. It feels like I'm going home and I'm doing the thing that relaxes me, like watching TV. Mm-hmm. But in this case, it's drawing these absurdly silly human beings and creating these really weird stories that make surgery, hopefully, seem not as scary. Yeah. But yeah, it is. If I wasn't a surgery resident, I'd probably be at my 50 books by now.
All right. That's
not
cool.
there yet.
Hey, I got to ask you, this is an old bone to pick, and the bone isn't with you, but I got to talk to somebody about it. You weren't even on the earth when it happened, but I remember when I was a kid and I had to get my tonsils out, one of the things that they did to kind of convince me it was going to be okay is they said, when we're finished, you can eat as much ice cream as you want. And I said, all right, cool. And I had the surgery and came to the next day, and I didn't want to eat ice cream. I didn't want to eat anything. And then I figured out they scammed me.
Yeah. Huge scam. It's a trick. It's a huge trick, a huge scam. We say that often, after when a kid has an appendicitis and we're like, after surgery, you can't eat before surgery because it makes putting you to sleep dangerous. After surgery, you can have whatever you want. And then it's like, I don't want anything for quite some time. And it's like, we do trick you a little. Try to make you feel a little more excited for surgery.
Well, let's, and it just brings back to our mind that the fact that surgery, no matter how often it happens, it's scary, and accidents can happen. And when you're talking about somebody who's 5 or 6, I think I was 6 or 7 years old when I had my tonsils out, and just the idea that, hey, you're going to go into the hospital, we're going to put you asleep, I'm going to put a scissors down, however they got the tonsils up, but we're going to cut something out of your body. Don't worry, it's going to be fine. Yeah. That's, it makes sense that kids aren't going to buy that.
No. And even it's a form of trauma, surgery, where we're causing trauma. Granted, it's organized trauma. It's on purpose, but we're traumatizing your body to do something good, but it doesn't matter. It's still scary. And, there is no, I think, easy way to really make someone feel comfortable with that. There's going to be no perfect way, because if unless you are, a brand old baby who can't understand words and doesn't know what surgery is, you're going to go into surgery and be scared. Mm-hmm. And so my goal is to just decrease that as much as possible and to just say hey, this is what we're doing. Because I think understanding what's happening helps with fear. Mm-hmm. There's my favorite quote, one of my favorite quotes ever. I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, huge Harry Potter nerd, have a Harry Potter tattoo. Don't get me started. But Dumbledore had a quote that I really like, and I feel like it's my inspiration behind these books. And he says, "It is the unknown we fear when we look upon death and darkness, nothing more." And so I love that, because a lot of what is feared, I think, by patients is just the not knowing. And how can you know it all? I mean, we go to med school for 4 years, learn just the language. Then we're in residency for God knows how long and fellowship. And that's, us who already have this background in medicine trying to understand. And so how do you explain to someone who's in fear, who's coming in sick, who's coming in vulnerable? How do you explain to them and make them understand? And so, we do the best we can. And I think these books, my goal again is that these books can help.
Yeah. Yeah. You're trying to explain it to somebody who's scared and someone who doesn't understand how to tie their shoes.
Right. It's a twofold. It's harder explaining it to a child than an adult to begin with. Like that also is a problem to start with, is, your extent of just, medical understanding and knowledge base is going to be harder to understand, like, what we're talking about. Yeah. And, I love, obviously, people I work with, but, like, not everyone is really good at speaking in a level that kids would understand, or even some adults. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
one of the questions, and you might not know the answer to this, I don't know, but I'm thinking that, okay, I'm a kid, I'm sick, or my brother is sick and he's a kid, and okay, this nice doctor is telling me that she has this experience, and she's been very reassuring, and I'm going to go to sleep. I'm not going to feel anything. They're going to do this very carefully, take this bad thing out, and then I'm going to feel better afterwards. But what I want to know, Dr. Maria, is why did this happen to me?
Right.
Why do I need to go in?
Absolutely. And so that's one of the things I try to talk about in each of the books. So it again kind of depends on what you're going through. But I have at the end of every book a kind of facts section and a doctor word section. And that goes into more of the kind of why. So for instance, one of my books is called Biliary Atresia, My Troublesome Tree. And there are newborn babies who are born with biliary atresia, and we don't know why. But basically what it is the bile system that comes out of your liver is really scarred and diseased and doesn't work. And so these babies have liver failure soon after birth. We don't know why. And they end up needing what we call a Kasai procedure, plus or minus a liver transplant. And so it's a very kind of terrifying and quite, large or significant extent of management and treatment that goes into this disease process. And it's lifelong, because if you get a transplant, I mean, that's a lifelong thing. Mm-hmm. And so trying to show these kids, I have a section at the end, because a kid, as a baby, obviously, this isn't something I read as a baby, but they grow up, they have a big scar from their liver transplant, and they can look back and say, why did this happen to me? Why me? Why? And all my other friends don't have this big scar across their belly. And so that's part of it, is trying to explain, this wasn't something you did. Mm-hmm. Here's some facts about biliary atresia. There's X many kids in the world who get it every day, or are born with it every day. And it's nothing that any of you guys did. It's something we don't understand, actually. And then there are other books that kind of, where there is a more specific cause or reasoning behind it. I try to explain that as best I can using analogies, and just kind of lay out the facts so that, again, kids can realize that it's not just them. Mm-hmm. Number one, they're not alone in this. And number two, it's not their fault.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's really important. Just that whole, it's not my fault. You didn't do anything mm-hmm. wrong. It's just a numbers game. You're not the only one. You might be the only one in your neighborhood or your city, but there are other kids that are going through this. Yeah.
And that's like a big goal of mine too with these books. I did a research study on them in the hospital, and that's what's kind of really spurred me to continue creating them. But in this study, I met a patient who was talking about how, they have a G tube or a feeding tube, and no one else in their school has a feeding tube. And so no one really knows what a feeding tube is, and they get made fun of. And, having a book that explains feeding tubes, maybe kids who don't have feeding tubes could read it. Like maybe in schools they could look at it, just kind of showing, and then also showing that you're not alone. There are lots of kids reading this book or who have feeding tubes. And this isn't just you. You're not alone in this. I think it's really important.
And I love the fact we talk a lot on the show about books being mirrors, windows, sliding glass doors. So kids seeing themselves represented positively in the pages of a book. I absolutely understand the value of a kid who's facing a specific surgery or an illness, being able to see their story being laid out in the book with a positive ending, and that's really important. But I also really think that it's real important for books to be windows. So the kid in that third grade classroom who has a classmate who has a feeding tube, for that kid to be able to read this book and to develop some empathy to the point where the last thing in the world that I'm ever going to do is to make fun of that kid.
Exactly. And that's exactly it.
Yeah. I'm wondering, do you have a hard time switching, because being a doctor and a surgical resident and being a kid's author, those are two different parts of your brain. Do you ever walk into the operating room and forget that you're not working on a children's book and start talking silly with the other doctor?
Well, I feel like a lot of my attendings have like joked to me that like I'm not a child, but I have childlike curiosity. I'm like very, I feel like I end up staying the same between these two roles, and I'm definitely unusual, I think, for a surgical resident in that way, maybe, but it makes being a resident and working that much more fun, kind of staying very lighthearted and joking about things and comparing things to maybe silly things. It really, for me, there is no differentiation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's really, I not that I have the brain power or the dedication to become a doctor, but I'm fascinated with the human body. And I know every time my son's had every part of his body scanned, and I was in whatever room it was, watching and looking, and even my colonoscopy, I stayed awake for it. And the doctor doing it I am watching it on the screen, and my doctor's like, "You're into this?" I'm like, "God, tell me what I'm seeing."
Like, I love it.
I love it. And he goes, "Well, do you want to see something really cool?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So he goes, "All right, we're gonna." And the nurse is like, "Oh, doctor, we got other patients." "Oh no, he wants to see this," and he takes me on this. I don't know where he took me. He took me somewhere.
That's amazing. But that's another goal of these books is like, I obviously loved medicine growing up. I had no idea what half the things that I now know were as a child, and I got my hands on as much of that stuff as I could. Mm-hmm. There just aren't those resources. And so I think these could also be a cool venue for kids to explore and understand anatomy and human physiology better at younger ages. Mm-hmm. And like one of the books I created, which is a little different than the rest of the series, is called Doctors A to Z. And it's like a silly alphabet book, but it goes through every letter as a different type of doctor. Because, like, I didn't know what a pathologist was at age 12. Mm-hmm. And I think, like, being exposed to these professions earlier, per se, could also inspire people to potentially pursue these professions and who might not otherwise know about them. And so I do think there is a role for that.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that these books could also create better patients, because you seem like the type of doctor, and my personal physician is the kind of doctor that really likes that I'm curious and ask questions. I know that there are other doctors who just want me to shut up and take whatever they give me, but I'm like, no. Am I right about that? Is, somebody
Yes.
who's curious and is willing
Yes.
to ask questions, they're better patients?
Absolutely. The more, you know your body and you know yourself better than anyone. And so if you know what to look for and what we kind of are interested in terms of whatever you're going through medically, that's going to help you and that's going to help us. And I think another part of that is there are so many resources available nowadays that, let's say you have disease X and you go online, you don't know what is a good resource and what isn't. So the other part that I think this kind of may help with is it's giving you a resource that, we've created from a doctor's perspective that has gone through kind of a screening process per se, and is reliable information that then you can take and impart at your doctor's visit, or let's say the other thing. I mean, one of my big goals was when I started the research study, and I haven't looked at this yet, but there have been numerous research studies that have shown that if caregivers have less fear and better understanding and better satisfaction in the hospital, post-operative outcomes, so like after surgery, go down. Mm-hmm. And that makes sense, because if you understand what you went through and you understand how to take care of yourself and you understand when to call the doctor and ask questions, you're going to do better. Mm-hmm. And so I haven't looked at that specifically with my research, but it's exactly what you're saying. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So you're also reminding us that we shouldn't be getting our medical expertise from Facebook. We should teach our kids.
You can, but it just might not be perfectly accurate.
And again, that's another really important lesson for families to be teaching their kids, is just like, there's a lot of information out there. A lot of it is crap. And we have to help our kids learn how to discern that.
Yeah.
And certainly if we're talking about, medicine and our health, we want to get the information from an author who is an expert in it. And I think, Dr. Marie, you will qualify as an expert.
I try.
Hey, what is, you have 18 books out. One of the books is the Doctor's A to Z. I got to ask, what's Z? What kind of doctor is Z?
So Z isn't a doctor. I literally could find nothing. Because so for instance, like X is maxillofacial. Because there's no, so Z, I could find nothing that would work. So the book's written in a silly rhyme. And so the Z part is like Z, like don't fall asleep. It's kind of a silly ending. Because I could find nothing.
I thought you were going to tell me you made up zebraologist.
I could have, I guess. That's a good idea.
What is out of the 18 books, what was the most difficult subject for you to tackle in a book?
So that would be one of the neonatal, which is like, the brand new baby books called Congenital Diaphragmatic Hernia. And so that's brand new babies can be born with a defect or a hole in their diaphragm. And your diaphragm is the muscle that separates your chest, your heart, and your lungs from your abdomen. And they can be born with this big hole where stuff from their belly will then go up into their chest. And so their lungs don't develop the way they should. And it can be pretty severe and dangerous. And that can be on top of other problems as well, unfortunately. And so that book was difficult for me because the story came fairly easy to me. The analogy made sense. I compared your body to like a house, and you have an upstairs and you have a downstairs, and there's a hole in your floor. And obviously things can fall in and out. And so we got to repair that hole. And so that makes sense. But the hard part is a lot of babies with this problem don't do great. And some may die. And so it was really hard for me to write that book and try to, give an ending that addressed the babies who do well, but also address the babies who don't. And that was really difficult because it's easy to write a book about something that everyone does, 99.9% of people do just beautifully from. But it's not so easy when that's not the case. And I didn't want, parents or siblings of kids who maybe didn't do so well from this to read this and say, well, this wasn't what this wasn't what happened to my baby, and make it a harder thing for them. Yeah. And so I played around with that a lot. And the book ends with the kid who had it as a baby kind of going to bed, and he's dreaming about all the babies who didn't do as well as he did and sending like love to them. And so I was hoping in that way it kind of respects and sends a little happy, loving message to the families that go through a harder time with this condition.
Well, I'm really happy that you mentioned, a loving message, because I think that is at the foundation of this series. Is you created this, and we've joked around a lot about, your energy and spare time and all that kind of stuff. But I think that this came out of a sense of love that you have for your patients and their families, and I really want to celebrate that, and thank you for doing that. Before we go, what is there one in the 50 books that you're planning on writing?
Okay.
Is there one subject that you are really excited about and you can't wait tackling? And is there another that you're like, oh, I don't really want to deal with that one?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
The one that I'm really excited about is liver transplant, just because I want to be a transplant surgeon and I love transplant. And so I'm just really excited to make that book for kids because I'm so passionate about it. And so that's that one. The ones that I'm not so excited about, but I'm still honestly excited about them, are the ones where I'm not necessarily the expert. And so it's a little bit harder for me to grasp something that I may not understand, create a good analogy. So, for instance, I have good friends who are orthopedic surgery residents, and I've been talking with them about creating some orthopedic children books, because I hadn't thought that I would ever go into or create orthopedic books, but after they've seen these books, they reached out to me about it. And so I'm working on one called Broken Bones, and it is totally outside of my comfort level. But luckily, again, I want these to be factually correct. I want them to be accurate. So it's going to be co-written with one of the orthopedic residents who, this is her jam.
Awesome.
But it's harder for me to do it because it's not like secondhand nature to me per se.
I'm really excited. So we absolutely need to know where we can go to find out more about the Strength of Scars series.
So we launched a website about a couple weeks ago, fairly new, and it's www.strengthofmyscars.com. And all the books that we currently have written, or that I've currently written, are available on there. And if you buy a book, $1 from every book goes to a charity that supports that condition or that surgical, disorder, or something that supports children's medical X. So we're trying to give back a little bit as well.
Well, that's really wonderful. Should we give a shout out to the folks who support you and are saying, okay, yeah, Dr. Marie, you can go write the book a little bit and we'll cover for you over here?
Yes, please. Huge shout out to the Department of Surgery in general at my hospital. When I came up with this idea, first off, the pediatric surgeons from Pediatric Surgical Associates, which is the group in Charlotte, led by Dr. Bambini, supported me absurdly and kind of were like, go do it, whatever you want, try it out on our patients. Like, if you need help, awesome. And they've kind of gone through my books and made sure that everything also is factually correct from a pediatric surgery standpoint, because they're the legit pediatric surgeons. And then the Department of Surgery at Atrium Health, kind of led by Dr. Brent Matthews, gave me a grant to study the books. And through their support, that's what really let me realize that there was an impact that the books were making. And that's why I ended up continuing this, and then motivating me to create more and motivating me to create the website. So without the support of the hospital, the residents, the attendings, everyone, there's no way this ever would have happened. It's absolutely.
Well, we want to give a shout out to them. I just love the fact that the head of pediatric surgery is Dr. Bambini. What a perfect name.
And he's the best. He's the absolute best. So he's featured in a couple of the books. I always draw attendings I know usually.
Uh-huh.
And so he's a featured attending in some of the books.
That's cool. Dr. Bambini, I love it. I've had a great time speaking with you today, Dr. Maria. I want to encourage everybody, I want to encourage everybody to check out Strength of My Scars. I think this is a really important series. I think that this would be a great addition to family libraries. I think it should be a must for school libraries, in public libraries, just because. Thankfully, there weren't many kids in schools with a lot of serious issues because they didn't go to school when I was a kid. They went to hospital schools or they were tutored at home. And now, thankfully, kids with certain kind of challenges are able to go to school with help and support. But a lot of times, they just show up and no one talks about it. It's not polite. Don't talk about it. You don't ask that person why they have a scar, why they have a tumor coming. Just shh, and that's the worst thing we can do.
Right. Not acknowledging it is way worse. Right. Way worse.
Yeah. So the Strength of My Scar series is a great way to educate kids who aren't experiencing it, but need to be a friend and a loving friend and a respectful friend to kids who are going through it. A great resource for families that are going through this. And so thank you for creating this, and thank you so much for being on the show. Our guest today has been Dr. Marie Baimis George. Dr. Maria, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much, and I had an absolutely wonderful time talking with you as well. I really appreciate it.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. It will be another Protecting the Planet with Your Kids episode of the show. Neil Ketching will be in to talk about his book, Carbon Choices, and how we can talk to our kids about the choices that we make that'll better protect our planet. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, want to start by thanking our guest, Dr. Marie Baimis George. Please be sure to check out the Strength of My Scars series. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Justina Thompson, Helen Frazier. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. I want to thank Augie the doggy for having my back here in the studio. Most of all, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.